Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrew Noonan. I am from ForeScout Technologies. The webinar will start in a couple of minutes just to give people some time to connect in. And I will start sharing my presentation. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Noonan. I'm a systems engineer in ForeScout Technologies. We'll start the presentation now, and this will be a presentation around visibility upon your networks and transforming security through visibility with ForeScout Technologies. Just a few administration tips beforehand. If there are any questions as we go through the presentation, I will come and get to them if you raise your hand or if you post a question in the questions window, if that's available. And also another quick thing to ask is that Foursys Secure Talk will be, and ForeScout will be on board with Foursys Secure Talk as it travels through the country on 5 different dates between May and June, and it would be welcome if anyone could join at any point in time. And we'll be presenting their integrations with ForeScout and of course with Foursys and their offerings too. So without further ado, I shall get going. So the purpose of the webinar, we're going to talk about visibility across the network and security on the network, and understanding your assets in place there. So and the byword that I'll probably use a couple of times today is that you can protect what you can't see, and that works in multiple ways. If you don't know what's there on your network, you can protect it from the bad actors and the malware that's out there. And then also, if you don't know what's there, you can protect the things you don't know that's not there and that may be bad already on your network. So as I run through a brief presentation on this, I'll start off with setting the scene of where we look at the environment through the ForeScout side. So the trends that we're seeing in security, then the challenges within security and IT and where they're going, and then the IT landscape and how that's changing over time, how things can be managed and how the network is changing and how the attitudes of users and where devices are changing, moving onwards. And then what I'll do is I'll run in to show how ForeScout aids in those those challenges and to those solutions and what we can do for that in that and how we work in those things. Primarily, I'm going to focus on visibility, but we also have two other pillars that where we sit our solutions upon. One are the visibility and control and orchestration, and we'll focus on visibility, and then finally I'll wrap up with a short demonstration of what our platform does and how it works, just to see the visibility you see on devices, and then hopefully we'll have some good questions and answers. Okay, so without further ado, I'll kick off. It really works. So firstly, I'll start cybersecurity trends and how things are going. No matter where you are in any organization, and there's no immunity from cybersecurity threats. There is many reports that will come and say, and show how cybersecurity threats are acting on the networks, be they through social engineering or through malware or different various kinds of people trying to connect to networks and how they control those. And secondly, then how things are going is that the average cost of those security incidents arising. As you can see, this is an excerpt from a report from the Ponemon Institute. This is very large, and it's taken as a very large record, and it's also very American-based, so I apologize for that in advance. But it goes to show that the big takeaway from this point is that security incidents are costing more money, and they're also costing more time, which is towards the cost of them. That when they're found, the problems that they do cause and how to remediate from them is causing issues. And again, visibility provides the key into having the visibility of cutting down those security incidents as they happen. And then lastly, it's around regulatory mandates. Depending on the industry you're in, if you're in a highly regulated industry, there are mandates to run through financial areas, or kind of in healthcare. There are industries there that cause that you have to adhere to, and you have to understand where things are in your network. For instance, in the UK, we have the FCA, and that has a standard. FCA for financial institutions, and it has a standard setting that everybody needs to know what's on their network at any point in time. And it's one of their adherences that they audit all financial institutions to. And it runs down to different environments, be it government or be it healthcare, in the same scenario as well. And then also looking after the data upon those things. And then secondly, we look into security challenges. Once again, I apologize, it's very American-centric. We are an American organization, but I will favor some things with some of our own local issues. We're looking at a lot of attacks that happen and what they do. The denial of service attacks we have there, we've already seen them growing out of into IoT types of denial of service attacks, as well as from last year with the security cameras we've seen, and then also about disabling antivirus, so that you can disable, so you can go and infect different devices in the likes of Yahoo. One that isn't mentioned there is Sony. It's a very similar thing as the Yahoo hack, in the sense that they also did the same thing. They actually broke the antivirus agent. They reported back to the antivirus agent that it wasn't working, when malware was taking over these devices and be able to send back and forth. And these will keep on going as long as you don't have the visibility across the network devices and orchestration to talk amongst the different services you offer to be able to bring that together. And one of the big things out of this, which is probably where we've seen talk more than anything else, is that most of the vulnerabilities are actually exploited out of the fact that things aren't updated and aren't kept up to date. So with services and processes, and updating for patching solutions, which Talk had that. One of the primary reasons that they were breached was that they had an old CQL flaw, which was a vulnerability which was quite old, and was brought and was just exploited very easily by people with not terribly not having to have very great levels of knowledge to be able to do that. And that's one of the things, again, in visibility, is looking into understanding what your devices are doing and where they're sitting and what type of compliance they have, and what if they're running out of date code or out of date systems. They should be updated, and we should know about those things. And then moving on to the landscape is changing itself. So we have seen within ForeScout that the landscape is changing into IoT and non-manageable devices. And we'll talk about non-manageable devices being devices that you wouldn't put an agent upon. They're not traditionally managed through an Active Directory solution or some sort of management solution. They're just separate devices coming in. And this is born out from a lot of companies have BYOD solutions and IoT, and people bring in their own devices, their tablets, their PCs, to connect to internet wireless solutions. Us in ForeScout have seen many of our customers with different types of solutions and different types of IoT devices that come in when and the IT and the management of an environment haven't been aware that they've had so many different devices on their network. Even though they may only be internet based, they're still on their network trying to kind of connect to different things. So they may have malware on them, but there's no control over those devices. And as I mentioned briefly earlier as well, we have seen IoT security breaches, and IDC is reporting that we'll see most networks just have an IoT security breach at some point in the very near future. I've seen it even with a customer of ForeScout, and they're a financial institution. When we did our first proof of concept, when we were looking at visibility across their network, they've seen door access controllers across the whole environment. The door access controllers were sitting on the corporate network, and they weren't managed by IT. They weren't managed by a security or risk personnel. They were managed by facilities management. And these door access controllers have been sitting on the network for many, many years. They ran code, and then they were about 10 years old, and they ran code just 5 or 6 years old. And because no one had done any actual kind of risk assessment of what those door access controllers did, no one had known that they were still on default usernames and passwords. And a very short Google search would have turned around and said that the default username and passwords, which were on them still, was admin. But these door access controllers control access to everything in their environment. So they were a retail bank, so that was the door access controllers to get into their retail branches, also to get into their data centers, everywhere. So someone within on a network and be able to manage those and able to control those devices, they would have access to the entirety of their environment. And that brought a massive breach. Now, luckily enough, it's never been exploited, but it was there to do as a risk that would be exploited. And quite often they did not realize at that point in time that they had a big risk in their network for people, even accidentally could have opened the doors that shouldn't have been opened by having that environment. And then lastly, on the security landscape side of things, all our products, all our solutions within IT are silos. They operate in silos. They don't generate to talk to each other. So quite often, a lot of devices, a lot of the solutions have good visibility doing, you kind of either doing management of the solution, seeing the endpoint management, seeing network management, but they don't talk to each other, so that information can be correlated together and pulled together very well and very simply. So, and generally, that needs some more staff or staff being overtasked to be able to kind of manage those devices and manage any issues as they come out, and also how to manage onboarding of people as they come. So it makes you kind of overwhelmed on how they manage things and how they go. And which brings us into the last piece, is that kind of automation. So within if you can automate devices as you go, you automate onboarding a process, automating automating any incident management, you can take away day-to-day running of people and to people to run on projects and to be able to look at the higher end processes rather than just doing a lot of the process, doing a lot of the tasks that should be automated. So bringing into that, visibility will bring in, once you have visibility, you can then bring onto automation if you orchestrate across your security or IT tool set in general. And you can see that's a report there from Gartner, which says we're going to move, hopefully move towards that. And we have seen it, again, in ForeScout customer base, we've seen automation being one of the key things when using a ForeScout counteract solution, is that when a solution can be automated, it controls the environment, and there's an audit logging process that can be kept when an automated event has occurred, which has saved time and effort from IT teams. So that will bring us all into where ForeScout helps in these scenarios. So we have 3 pillars we sit upon, as I've said. The first one is C, and that is visibility, providing visibility across the network of all IPs and all connections into your network. And that gives us a massive contextual data per device and the users of those devices connecting in. And we get to see what's happening at all points in time on that network. Secondly, that will lead in, once we have a good visibility, we can do control. And we can vary the control, and I'll have a brief talk about it, a slide about it later on, to talk about how we do control and the different variances we can do. We can take a very hard approach of blocking to a very light touch approach of doing notifications and managing notifications of when devices come in. And lastly then, which I think fits very neatly into visibility, is orchestration. If any solution has visibility of certain areas for a device or network, to orchestrate amongst other solutions brings value and brings time savings and effort savings in being able to manage those devices as they go through. So if I can jump into, I'll jump into the C piece. Some of the key things we think, and we look at, from talking to clients, and actually talking to clients and prospects within ForeScout, is that they want agentless solutions that see everything on the network and don't necessarily have to have an agent on board to manage that device, because a lot of devices may be IoT and what they can do. And so we do provide an agentless-based solution to see everything on that network. And the second key piece is continuous, is that we don't just look at the device once as it arrives on the network, is that we're looking at the device and what they are constantly. And then when a posture changes or the device changes, we can reassess whether that device is still valid to be around or not, or that it should be around or not. So I'll fill these in because I like to fill in the diagrams as they go. But the major piece we like to look at is that when devices are manageable, we can see, most solutions will see the device that manageable with agents, and they might not see that the agents are out of date and there might be a vulnerability or they're broken in that sense. But they will see basically the manageable size of the, if I took it down, they'll see the manageable size of the manageable with an agent. They are most solutions. Us in ForeScout, the way we look at it is that we see all of that devices, but we also see the non-traditional devices without agents, to bring that on to, and see what they're doing and what the devices and applications were doing. And then so all of these you filled in. So all of these things that are visible on the left, and then invisible on the right. And with ForeScout, we will bring that visibility together to show that a full breadth of what each device is doing, what agents are on board, when they're out of date, who owns the device and where it is and where it's connected to. And that gives us a brief overview of visibility. I have some more detail in-depth slides that we'll go into, and we'll have a conversation around to say exactly how we do that to get in more technical. But I'll jump in. I'll just go briefly over to control, just to show you that again. A control we look to do, we look to make it at some point to be an automated solution, and automate that control. But then we have different, as I said, we have different ways of controlling. We could be just notifications, depending on what that is. And it could be just compliance, compliant notification, compliant messaging, then down to restriction, and to do different types of restriction and remediation. But as I said, that's all for today. We'll come back to, we can come back to that, and we can come back to another point in time. And then secondly, then again, orchestration. Once we have, or thirdly, once we have the visibility, we're looking down at orchestration with other solutions. We can look at things like vulnerability assessment tools to integrate with vulnerability assessment tools. Even though as great as they are, such as Rapid7, they don't often run continuously. They run when the scan has been set for the device. So and then if you think about it, ForeScout, if they see a device coming onto the network and we can check it hasn't been scanned before with integration with the likes of Rapid7, then we can turn around and say this device needs to be scanned before we allow them onto the network, or we need to understand that it has no vulnerabilities before we allow them on. So it allows us to really break down the silos and share that information of what we know about devices and what endpoints coming onto the network, and then being able to automate the workflows between other solutions, and then automate that response. Again, definitely for if anyone has any questions on it, we can definitely do a deep dive into those on a one-to-one basis, and you can talk to any of your ForeScout representatives or Foursys representatives to set that up at any time. So now, if I jump into more detail of visibility, we'll look at the breadth of visibility. This slide is, and the next one, they're all about it. I call the W's, which is who's, the whys, and the what's, and where. So primarily, we're going to look into each device and say who they are, whether they're employee or not on the device. Then who owns the device? Where do we want to put the device once we know where its ownership level is, and what type of device it is. Because some things will be manageable very well. Some things you want to understand maybe the what type of device it is. Where do we want to put it, especially if it's an IoT device? Should we have access to it, or we should let it out to the internet, or maybe we shouldn't let it to the internet, with the likes of it being adding into it being a bot, into an environment. So how we can control those devices and giving the visibility of them. And then exactly where the device will be connected to. We know exactly what switch, what office it's connected to, what switch, what, it's wireless, where exactly it sits in the wireless, what VLAN it's on, what SSID, and being able to control that, have a finite point of saying what that device has done and where it's being. It gives us many things. Understandably, we control what that device is, but we can also turn around and say, we can audit that where that device has been at any previous time, so we can look back and triage an event that may have occurred at any point to say when it's happening. And then, which I think is very importantly for devices, especially with devices when they get taken over malware, what is the hygiene? So we understand where a device sits and what software is on it, and if we see software that is it's not going to be non-corporate software, or out-of-date patches, or it's got security security vulnerabilities or any type of vulnerabilities. We can see that where the hygiene is, and you can control that or remediate those devices as they say. So on that, then I'll just have a brief view of how we detect and inspect those devices to get that information, and then I'll go through a detailed list of how we do it to gather device information from the network. So primarily on the who again, we'll pull information, we'll talk directly to an Active Directory or an LDAP or even Radius, and you pull out who that user is, pull the groupings down of what that user may be. We can then also talk to the likes of DHCP to have information on the device it's connecting to understand that it is a Windows device, or they're talking in a tablet, or they're connected via their mobile device, where that comes from. And then what, and this is, in two ways we'd look at how the what of that information is. There's a passive way that we can sit passively listening to traffic and data, and listening to what's happening on an environment, what they're doing, what operation systems are going on, what ports and protocols have been sent. There's also a way of doing a more active manner to scan those devices to understand what they're doing, where they sit. So by tactically placing how you tap a network to understand where it's going is very important to understand the traffic it's sending and the people and the information there. And then where they all fit. So looking into kind of all your switching and network infrastructure to understand where everything sits and where they are, and pull that information together. And once you have all that, you correlate it all together in a singular view to understand that here's a device, here's a user, here's the network switch port they're in, here's what they've been doing, here's that information, and keeping that information, and then discuss having that visibility of everything that's doing at any point in time. And then lastly, as we've mentioned, is posture assessment of where we'd look in the device, depending if it's a Windows or Mac or Linux device, or how to look and manage that device, or then even a device which is not manageable, such as an IoT type device, or an IP phone or IP printer, all areas that need to be managed, because they're all areas that are potential vectors into the network without any controls on them. And that is then is the last slide you'd be probably grateful to hear, as to how I'll run through how we see devices and how we interconnect kind of as part of our solution. So one of the way we'd look is we'd use the likes of SNMP, and we'd pull devices to see what's connected to them. So we'd kind of interact, with an interactive poll to understand what devices are connected at any point in time, and correlate kind of that physical port or physical access point it gets to. And then also we'll be looking to integrate and receive traps from devices when something connects, or any traps from switches in that environment, but we'll also receive information from the likes of logging systems as well. If you knew that there's some other information we can pull in, that information would be all very useful to pull that together. And then also to monitor if we were using the likes of 802.1x for an authentication mechanism to authenticate devices to allow them onto the network and become the Radius server or in that environment also. Looking at the HCP request to see what new device comes and one request an IP address. There's also a very useful point in this, is that you look at DHCP requests, you're looking at devices coming in, and you're able to marry up what a MAC address of a NIC vendor would be against what the DHCP request would be, because the request for Windows DHCP is different to a Mac DHCP or other types of device. So I would look at this as that we know this is an anomaly detection when somebody would try to connect in and try to pretend to be a different type of device than they are. If someone's trying to pretend to be an IP phone rather than be their Macintosh device, because they're trying to subvert the security structures upon your network. So that kind of in terms of visibility, seeing that type of information happening, that someone has a MAC address of their taking a MAC address of their phone, but actually when they do a DHCP request, they actually say I'm an Apple device. So something very different than that, and they're looking at anomaly detection in that sense. And then span networks and the CTAP networks to see traffic as they come on board. And then we also have the capability to go and do scans on the network. So they're kind of banner scans, so they're very light touch scans to understand what devices are there and to give an indication of what they would be, whether they're Windows, Mac, or different types of devices, IoT type devices, to be able to profile down to understand that some things are wallboards, some things the HVAC system, how they come in and how they connect and what they do in the network. And then once you manage, you manage devices, you want to use credentials that you already have on those devices to be able to kind of able to look at this posture assessment of where they do and what they go. Very useful information then is to use the likes of NetFlow to pull out feeds of what traffic is happening at any point in remote sites where you won't necessarily have appliances or devices connecting in. And then import data if need be, which I did mention earlier on, unfortunately, and I forgot it was the point here. So any of the data will be there for you at any point in that sense. And then we also have a capability to use agents if need be. But primarily everything we've always discussed, and we'd like to discuss on an agentless basis, so that it's a simpler definition to pick up anything on a network without using an agent. So that is in a nutshell how we do visibility. I hope that's very good. What I do have then is a brief demo, but I will check just to see if there's any questions so far. And no, not yet. Okay, so I will jump in, and if I show you here, I can show you our solution. So this is the ForeScout solution, and a single pane of glass, as it would be in any type of size and solution. We have 4 quadrants on our solution. We have one quadrant which, as you can see, is a tactical map, which shows different, if you have multiple sites, it shows multiple sites like sitting there. As you can see on the screen, there is a green and there is a red. And the green is that the site is okay, it's in compliance, whatever compliance you've set it will be, and the red will be showing up that we have some compliance issue potentially on that site. Down beneath it, then we list our number of devices connected upon our environment and where they're connected to. You probably can see there from the host names. You'll forgive me, I've used my surname as the name of host to protect the innocent, and it's slightly megalomaniac, and I do apologize, but it just to show you the kind of devices connected in and where they're connected in the domain. But we've used the devices, the host names were depending on DNS, the IP addresses, kind of. We have a concept of what we call segments, which is networking sites. So we can either use it by VLAN or we can use it by office to site, however it needs to be. But it gives us visibility to say that if we know a certain segment, I could call that London data segment, or I could call that, say Watford data segment, depending on where things were. So you would know exactly where a device would be, and then a MAC address of the device connecting. And then the IP address of this, of the switch port or device that's connecting in, and the switch, which port name, and then what type of network device it is. You can see there's right at the top there we have some Windows machines, and then we have different types of devices, VoIP and Linux machines. So I just click on one of these, and I will open up and show you the visibility we have from these devices. So I hope you can see my screen well. I'll just open this a little further. Primarily we're looking at, we see the MAC address, and we've looked at that information to pick it up from where our switch port is on our switch, and we looked at our IP address information. We would have gathered that from the switch it's connected to, and we would have asked to get that information there. I'll just go on a location basis. I'll pull that down. So on the switch information, we roll down. We look at where the switch host name is, where the ports are, what alias is. We pull all that information down of where everything is about a switch port. The fact that I'm on what VLAN I'm on at this point. And then, very interestingly also in terms of visibility, it's a number of hosts on the port, on the switch port. Again, this is one of the things where we see very easily and very quickly, as we can pull a policy together, is the number of devices that connect per switch port. And again, with a previous client, we had we did our proof of concept to show our device working, and we went and found within the first day in one building 12 hubs, 2 access points, a number of other switches that were all connected, unmanaged switches all connected underneath people's desks in this building, because they brought their own devices in and they just connected into their corporate switch port. They connected their own little hub or switch, and then they connected a number of devices into it, either be an access point or different things. And within those devices that were connected, we found 3 Xboxes, a PlayStation, and lots of other weird things that people have plugged into their network. But it just shows to show you that you can keep control of your network if just on the basis of number of devices connected into your corporate switch ports. and that people, when they connect in another MAC address, you can show that visibility of what that device is and what it's doing. So we have that. We have great granular information of everything that's happening on those devices. And then if I run down, I'll skip the radius information, but run down here, and I'll look at the information I have for DHCP. So I know this is a Windows machine, so I pull down the information of what a DHCP fingerprint is to marry that information up, so that if I was pretending to be something else, I can check that I'm there or not there. Another information I've just pulled down here, you can see, which is just standard. We look at. We've gone and looked at the devices and see what ports are open, so we can understand they're a Windows device. So we have a great confidence level that this is a Windows machine, what it's doing. And then we're also looking at kind of authentication pieces. As I'm tapping this network, we're looking at to see what authentication, who we're devices are authenticating with. And you can, if I look here, you can see the signed-in user in this name. It happens to be in the lab environment is my administrator, so we pull that information directly out of the Active Directory to see what the device is and the email address and the member of groups that they happen to be in as well. When the password is set last. So more information we can pull in straight out of the LDAP, and we can utilize that information in terms of visibility also. And if I come back up here just to kind of clear that out, we look also then where we can manage the device, so what part of Windows manage domain. We're then looking straight away at the simple thing is that we're looking into what that device. So now here, this is a lab machine. It only has Windows Defender, but we can see what's running when it's installed and when it was last updated as well, if we're looking at an appropriate solution in that sense. I hope that's quite clear. I have here, I'll show you just as a device, which is kind of an IoT type device. I have a couple of them here. But here's an IP phone. And generally, you won't manage an IP phone for visibility, but you'll get to see the device. So again, I've got my MAC address and where devices come in. I've also got DHCP event information, so I've seen traffic where it's DHCP. I can see where it's connected into my switch environment, and very aptly here, I can see the number of devices connected in this physical switch port. That I have a PC connected on the back of this IP phone. So I know that's correct, or I know that if there were 3 devices there, obviously somebody may not be using the device as it should be. But that's a very useful piece of information for us to pull out straight away to understand that sense of visibility. Again, I'm looking down. I can see the DHCP information, so I understand it is what it's meant to be. It's doing, and also what the open ports and that information is. I have admission event. I've seen DHCP requests on those devices. So very interesting on a device like that is because it is only on a visibility on the MAC address, to manage those devices, the most appropriate method generally is the most appropriate method before like ForeScout Scanner came out was to have the MAC address on a list that allowed it onto the network at any point in time. And what we found is that is insufficient method to manage a device coming onto the network. So we propose, and we do utilize this for many organizations, that we look at more interesting things on the device itself, so we can log onto the device using either the likes of SNMP if supported, or using a HTTP web page. We can pull some pertinent information like the serial number off that device, and be able to marry that information up across a database of your known devices to understand that it is meant to be one of your devices, and that MAC address hasn't been stolen as something comes in the network. So we check this device on a continuous basis to make sure it's the right thing. When someone takes the MAC address, we'll notice there's a change in the device because it doesn't respond back with the request we're making to find the serial number of the device. But again, that's on a more control factor. But it's, what we have here is just the visibility of the devices and understand what they're doing. In the same sense, I can run in and show you a printer, which is just down here and connected to our wireless. The same thing again. It's all the information we have, we're connecting it through wireless, where it's coming in a wireless access point where it's connected to, what ports are open on the device to understand what it is, and then we're able to pull that information in, and what ports are open and what it responds back to when we check on HTTP what that device would be. And that is how we do our basic visibility and give you that full breadth that you understand everything that connects upon the network at any point and what it's doing. And all I wanted to do was jump back in to show you from that point. It's just to say that on our last slide was if I run through these. it's kind of what ForeScout can do and how it can help you in your environment. Kind of some of the use cases we utilize very simply. The primary one we're talking about today is see all the devices, see what it's doing, and see how it's connecting on the network. But once we have that visibility across that network, we can integrate on a wider basis with an orchestration, just turn around and give out a greater contextual data across the network to see people and to understand, kind of what's happening on the network, and to make intelligent decisions and automate those intelligent decisions, to manage devices there. And on that note, I will say, thank you. I will see if there's any questions, and to see where we can go. If there's any questions, we can go from there. And we don't have any questions at present. I will think if there are no questions, you would be happy to contact any of your Foursys representatives, and then we'll, us in ForeScout and in conjunction with Foursys, we'll be happy to answer any questions that are coming from this at any point in time. And then lastly, I'll just say again, is that Foursys Secure Talk events are happening in May and June. Oh, I've just seen one question come in. I said, what sort of visibility do you have into VDI clients? Very good question. What we would do in VDI clients is we would see into the servers themselves, and how they would manage into we'd see into the servers themselves, and we'd see what the device is doing on that server. For the actual VDI clients themselves, because they'd be massive within that, we just see the server, and we can utilize an agent-based solution in that sense to understand what devices, what users are connected to that. So we would still get visibility into that scenario. Where we would do on the thin client maybe that you're connecting through, we'd have full visibility of that device and what it's doing at any point in time. And I have seen, second question is, what integration do we have with Cisco SG300 range? We do support them as a Cisco switch. In fact, in my lab, I do have it was called a Linksys, but it is called a Cisco switch in that environment too. So we do support them and do full integration with them for visibility and for control functionality of moving VLANs and be able to block users as well. I hope that answered your question. I think that's all, as everyone can see. I think that's all the questions we have. If so, if that's the case, I will say thank you very much for your time for listening. I hope it was useful, and I hope you have some more questions maybe on it, or you'd like to see the solution brief or specific demonstrations at any point in time. Please do let us know, and last, thank you very much for and have a great afternoon. Take care.